seconds. Okay, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Before we start, just a few housekeeping issues before we start. Just to welcome everybody to November's Accounting Audit Committee. If everybody could keep the microphones on mute, that would be really helpful until you want to speak on any particular item. If councillors or representatives do want to speak, just put your hand up either on the Teams hand or just give us a wave and we'll get you in as soon as possible. Before we start, maybe Joanne, could you do a roll call for us in terms of who we've got? So I can't see.
Yeah, so we've got Councillor Mohammed Amma, we've got Tommy Cooney, the Chair, Councillor Mohammed Iqbal, Councillor Brian Newman, Councillor Colin Carter, and then we have David Rothwell, David Watley. Then we have officers Dean Langton, Chief Executive, Craig Finn, Accountancy Manager, and we have people from internal and external audit, but I don't know whether they want to introduce themselves.
Yes, Ruth.
Hi, I just thought I'd introduce myself. So I'm Ruth Parker. I'm representing as your engagement manager on behalf of MIAA, and we provide your internal audit service.
Thank you.
And there's Julie Maskey as well, Tommy, if you want to invite her to speak.
Yeah, Julie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Chair, thank you very much indeed. Councillors, good evening. My name's Julie Massey, and I'm here as the engagement lead for the audit. Just as a bit of background for the committee, unfortunately, your engagement lead Mark Heap has been poorly for the last couple of months, and so I was drafted in just to ensure continuity of the audit service to you, to ensure that we deliver the external audit report to this committee. So I'm here only on a sort of a temporary basis, but very, very pleased to meet everybody on the call. And with me today, I've also got Sophia Iqbal as well, my audit manager.
Yeah.
Good evening.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, I think there's no apologies because we've got a full committee, so that's good. That's excellent. So straight on to the agenda. Declarations of interest. Councillors, Ruth?
It depends on the level of discussion, I guess, but agenda item 10, internal audit outsourcing discussion. So it might be that I might need to leave the meeting or for a temporary while.
Okay, sorry, Sophia. Hi, Sophia.
Sorry, that was from last time. Sorry, I'll lower it. That's
okay.
That's sorry.
Dean, just on what Ruth just raised there, is that correct? Exclude Ruth.
It is correct. I mean, I can be sufficiently vague to allow Ruth to stay. It's just to provide members with an update on progress, so I can do that without necessarily disclosing anything that would prejudice anybody's position.
That's fine. Okay. Item number 2, minutes. Anybody like to move those or second those? Councillors, happy with those minutes? Colin, yes? So Colin. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, that was accepted. Item 3, external audit, draft audit findings report 1920. Julie, Sophia, are you going to give us an overview on the audit findings?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
So the audit finds report that you have in front of you, it fulfills two purposes really. One is to summarise the key findings that have come out of the audit of the council's financial statements, but we also have a second key responsibility where we give a separate opinion on what we call our value for money conclusion, which looks at the council's overall arrangements for ensuring economy, efficiency and effectiveness in its use of resources. So I'll draw your attention to sort of the key messages that have come out per the headlines, which is set out on page 3 of our report. And obviously, as I'm sure members will understand in reading this report, both the preparation of these accounts and indeed the audit themselves has been undertaken in what can only be described as unprecedented circumstances, given the current COVID challenge. And so, we identified that this would have some impact on the way we had to undertake this work. And indeed, we updated the audit plan back in the summer to reflect that additional risk to the council as a result of COVID. That notwithstanding, I think it's absolutely important we put on record our thanks to Craig and to the team for all their cooperation during the course of this audit. It's been incredibly challenging from both sides, particularly as finance officers have been redeployed to focus on a number of other priorities across the council. And so undoubtedly, we have seen some impact in terms of the timeliness of some of the information coming through, but clearly the circumstances, we understand what has caused some of that challenge. The other aspect is that in normal circumstances, if we were undertaking this audit on site, we'd be able to have direct access to a number of the systems ourselves to extract information. But given we've had to, obviously that additional time will potentially come at an additional cost in due course, that we will need to obviously assess that position when we get to the conclusion of the audit to look at what impact that additional time has required as far as that is concerned. But actually, if you look at the overall results of what we've presented in the audit finds report, in terms of the number of issues that have come out of this audit, it's been very, very few in the grand scheme of things. And so actually, given those more challenging circumstances, other than a small number of disclosure updates and one audit adjustment that we found that's reported in the appendix of the report, which on the grounds of materiality management chose not to adjust, there are no significant findings really coming out of the audit. There are a few areas I do need to draw your attention to. Just for your information, whilst we will be proposing an unqualified audit opinion, both in terms of your accounts and also in terms of your value for money conclusion, unqualified is a clean opinion, so that's positive. I do need to make members aware that we will need to refer in our audit opinion to what we call an emphasis of matter. That is not unique to this council, and it's very reflective of the current environment and circumstances that we have at the moment, where your finance officers rely on professional external valuers to value your property that sits in your balance sheet. They have to prepare those valuations based on very specific procedures in line with the RICS requirements for qualified valuers, and under the guidelines that RICS have issued to its professional valuers, given the timing of when COVID put the country into lockdown towards the end of March, that created a lot of uncertainty for valuers to be able to determine materially reliable estimates of those valuations as at the 31st of March. And as such, you had to include additional disclosures in your accounts around those uncertainties. And it is those uncertainties that we are drawing attention to through this emphasis of matter paragraph. So for the avoidance of doubt, it's not a qualification, but it is a small addition that we will need to make into the audit opinion, just to draw attention to that material uncertainty. It also has a very similar impact, but in a more indirect way, in relation to your pensions assets. So in your balance sheet, you include a net pensions liability for the assessment that your actuary has prepared of the position on your pension fund at the balance sheet date. However, some of those pensions assets that form part of that net pensions liability is linked to property, and so the pensions assets that are managed by the pension fund obviously will also carry that very similar valuation uncertainty because of the position on those valuations as at the end of the year. So the emphasis of matter will also cover the pensions property aspects as well. Just moving on to the sort of status of the audit, we do have a small number of audit procedures to finalise before we're in a position that I can issue my opinion on the accounts. But based on the position that we are at as at today, I'm very confident that we will achieve that and ensure that that opinion is delivered by the statutory deadline of the end of November. Just finally then, in relation to a small update to the report since we issued this report through the papers, on page 5 of my papers, I set out under the section statutory duties, where I make reference to the fact that we may not have been able to certify the completion of the audit due to outstanding work for whole of government accounts. So once your officers have prepared the actual final version of the financial statements, they also have to prepare a small return that goes in to central government, so that at central government level, they're able to consolidate all of those numbers for the whole of government accounts. And whilst we don't have to do any detailed work on that return, we do have to prepare a short assurance statement to the National Audit Office to summarise some of the key numbers from the final version of the accounts. At the time that I originally wrote this report, that guidance from the National Audit Office hadn't been issued, and so we weren't sure at that point whether or not we would be able to complete that final piece of whole of government accounts work. But I'm pleased to say that this week we have had confirmation of receipt of that guidance, so I will now be able to, when we conclude the audit, also certify the audit formally as closed. Chair, I'll leave it there and open it out to any particular questions. But yeah, happy to take any thoughts or observations on the report.
Julie, thank you very much for that. Councillors, anybody got any questions? Councillor Carter? Is that an old hand? David Rothwell?
Yeah.
Hi, David.
Yeah. Hi, Tommy. Thank you. Just 2 or 3 bits from me, if I may. Firstly, I think very much from reading the report and listening to Julie, I'm sure we'd all want to echo her point and congratulate all the officers concerned for their efforts in producing such a great result, particularly under these circumstances. I think that's just important recognition. I had one question from Julie, just listening carefully to the emphasis of matter point that you made there, and you used the term it's not unique to this council in respect of the property valuation uncertainty. Can I take from that actually this is something that will be commonplace across authorities similar to Pendle in terms of disclosures within their financial statements?
Through your chair, on the whole, absolutely, David. That is a very fair assumption to make. There may be a very small number of authorities out there that don't have, a considerable property asset base. That actually, when you assess the impact of the uncertainty that the valuer report has provided, that we may come to the conclusion that not in all cases that it has a material impact. But I would say probably in about 98% of circumstances it will be applicable. Yes.
Yeah, so there wasn't anything that officers could have reasonably done differently to avoid the need for you to make this disclosure?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. That's all. Thanks, Tommy.
Thank you. Councillor Iqbal?
Yeah, thanks, Tommy. Julie, on page 21 of your report, you talk about or we talk about the situation as a result of the first lockdown with COVID and what we estimated the cost would be to the council for this year and what we've had from government. I'm just wondering whether you've got any comment in terms of in terms of risk, if we don't get the shortfall from government going forward as well, where do you think that'll leave us in terms of your professional opinion?
It's a very difficult one, Councillor, absolutely, and as I've said on other ones, you're not alone in this respect. It will mean, you know, a number of different options that the authority will need to consider. I'm not here to make any sort of recommendation of you as to which path that the council would go down, but you know, you would have to make a decision about whether there needs to be further cost saving measures needing to be introduced to manage any potential shortfall arising from any absence of any future funding. You do have some reserves available to you, but the whole principle around reserves are they're set aside there for you know for you know, sort of as an option of last resort, really. They're there to provide some buffer of support to the authority. So it will be a very difficult decision for members to make, but I would probably hand over to your officers to give some more specific views as to what the best possible courses of action are for your particular circumstances. I don't know whether the Dean wants to add any additional comments.
I'm sure he will.
I think as Councillor Iqbal knows, it is an evolving situation that we're in. So the government has provided us with some funding in order to meet the costs and shortfalls in income arising from COVID. That's been provided for the current financial year. I think we're still in the process of lobbying for more funding to cover those the impact of COVID. I think one thing that does concern me is the impact of COVID, not necessarily just this year, but as an ongoing impact into future years. And that's something we will need to pick up in our medium-term financial planning and understanding the impact of that and what that means for us and what it means for our lobbying strategy with government, not alone, along with, I think, the rest of local government, because it's not, as Julie said, an issue that's unique to us. That will have, in my mind, to feature in our thinking as we go forward, because I don't believe this is going to be a matter that's going to be solved just this year alone. So, and I think Councillor Iqbal knows that that's something that we're already starting to think about in our budget planning.
Thank you, Dean. Julie, just a few comments from myself. Clearly, the impact of COVID-19 on the assets of the council has had an impact, and I guess it still has the potential to have an impact in the future. I just note on page 13, there has been a decrease made of 2.3 million for assets that have been revalued, but then the assets that weren't revalued, there was no decision taken in terms to what looks like any provisions for those assets. Looks like we're leaving those assets at the same valuation as before, where we've clearly made a provision and a decrease of 2.3 million for the ones that were valued. And just linked into the pension question, would I be right in thinking that obviously there is assets and buildings linked to the pension, but what do I think, even though the unknown of COVID-19, that is probably a minor impact? We're thinking about longevity, where pensions are, and it's the long term rather than the short term. And the last one is just a question on the provision on the NNDR has increased by 228,000. I guess, is that very much a worst case scenario?
Chairman, it's probably more appropriate if I answer these questions rather than we ask Julie to do that, if Julie doesn't mind.
That's fine.
So in terms of the asset valuations, the assets are revalued on a rolling basis over a 5-year period. If I'm right, Craig, that's right, isn't it? So we do a fifth of assets every year. So that change in the valuation probably refers to that fifth that we've valued during this year. I think the issue around the emphasis of matter for external audit is that, of course, COVID came quite late in the day in terms of the preparation of the accounts. And clearly it just wasn't possible to do all the valuations of all the assets that we have in the time available. It's a recognition that valuation process needs to now consider that, I think as we prepare this year's accounts, the impact of COVID. And I think the other issue is it was probably too early to tell at that time what really the full impact of COVID will be on asset valuations. So I fully expect that's something that will get picked up in this year. In terms of the pension fund, like any pension investments, those investments are in a diverse range of assets. One of those asset classes will be property, inevitably, because it's a safe return over a longer period. I think what it is doing is just recognising again that asset valuations generally will be depressed as a consequence of COVID. And I'll give you two examples of that. Retail property, we know what's happening in the retail world. The demand for property is plummeting. And likewise, I suspect the demand for office space in city centres will start to plummet because we know that people can work from home. So I think those are two classes of assets where the values as was will need to be reviewed, and that will have a bearing on pension fund valuations in the future. And in terms of the business rates provisions, the increase in the provision was to some extent largely to reflect the impact of COVID, because we knew that as we were entering into lockdown, the collection of business rates would become that much more difficult as a consequence of COVID. And I think that's proven to be the case. I think it's been dampened somewhat by some of the efforts of the government to give both business rate reliefs on leisure, retail and hospitality businesses, and also the provision of business grants. But nevertheless, again, if there's a review of business rents as a consequence of COVID, that will feed through to business rateable values, which are based on business rents. So inevitably, the value of business rates will go down. And of course, you'll appreciate that when lockdown came in, we relaxed our collection regime around business rates, and that still hasn't got going in a way that will see us having a level of collection that we would normally accept. So we normally collect at least 98% of our business rates in any one year. That won't be as much this year. Does that help?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dean. Councillors, any other comments? Yeah, again, just from the chair, I just want to echo and thank John Thornton and the officers for the great work in terms of providing the report. It touches on the report, clearly difficult times in terms of challenges around communication, the transfer of data, etc. So I think that's an excellent achievement to get to where we are, and like to put on record our appreciation for that work. Thank you very much.
Chairman, I'd just like to say it looks like we could be the first in Lancashire to have the count signed off. Is that right? Julie, I don't know whether you know that, but
I don't know, actually.
I think we will be the first.
I think it is really, yes.
Yeah, as I said, the only thing that we're really waiting for is the assurance letter from Lancashire Pension Fund. So none of them can be signed off until we get that assurance letter. So we're keeping our fingers crossed to get the pension fund stuff back.
Held up by the county council once again.
Yeah, sorry.
Chairman, it is a credit to Craig and the team for leading this in very difficult circumstances.
Yeah, clearly. But it's a hat well worth having if we can get it done. So, chair to letter up. Okay. Councillors, okay to move on to item 4, which is the letter of representation. Dean, have you got anything to add to this or any comments?
No, Chairman, just to explain what this is, of course, as part of the closing off of the audit, clearly the external auditors cannot look. Okay, so they do request of us a letter of representations, and those representations are set out in the draft letter at Appendix A. It is broadly in the form that will be signed off. It may be tweaked according to any final matters that the external auditors come up with. But it is there as we expect to sign it off. It is to be signed off by myself as Chief Finance Officer and you, Chairman, as well. And it's required as part of the final procedures for closing off this audit. Thank you.
Sure.
Councillor,
happy with that, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bell. Move on to number 5 is the Redmond review. Julie or Sophia, have you got anything to add to this? Give an overview.
Yeah, I mean, Chair, I'm happy to go into as much or as little detail as you would like me to. I don't know if you've got the sort of the spirit and the essence of what this set of papers is covering. We're just incredibly conscious that the Redmond Review marks quite a significant, or potentially some significant changes coming down the line in terms of the regulatory regime around audit, and also potentially how the sort of scope of audit within local authorities. Still, clearly, there's still lots of work to do. The report that Sir Tony has clearly been published, but ultimately there's still a sort of a call to action, and indeed primary legislation that will be required to implement any of the recommendations that CLG do decide to take forward off the back of this report. So really the slides were here just as a bit of a highlight to set out the sort of the key audit recommendations that have come from that report. You know, as a firm, we're very pleased with the overall messages and the sort of direction of travel that this report is taking the regime. You know, as in terms of what was sort of supporting the review in the first place, clearly there has been some underlying concerns around the approach to audit across the sector, and we feel that these recommendations do certainly go some way to address some of those concerns from all parties involved. And so you know, we'll wait to hear the sort of any subsequent formal consultation that arises off the back of the recommendations. But I'd be happy more to open out to questions, or would you prefer me to take you through the slides page by page? I'm at the call of the chair.
I'm sure councillors will be happy to ask questions. If any councillors want it, maybe the slides could be circulated for councillors' benefit. Are councillors happy with that?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I guess that's Sophia and Julie. I mean, I guess you're okay to go now, or are you staying on the meeting? I don't think there's anything else on the agenda, is there?
If you think I should stay, I'm happy to stay. Otherwise, I would probably sign off.
Okay, okay, councillors. Item number 6, which is the statement of accounts. Craig, hand over to yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll take this one. Thank you. Purpose of the report really is to present for approval the statement of accounts as amended slightly with reference to colleagues from Grant Thornton and the draft audit findings report that has been presented this evening. It does include the small amendments to disclosure notes, equally makes reference to the unadjusted immaterial misstatement, and again reference to the emphasis of matter that features in the audit opinion, which, as we discussed this evening, will be not necessarily just for Pendle. Also recognises, again, what's been alluded to, challenging times for both ourselves and indeed the auditor to bring together the statements of accounts in an extended timetable as a consequence of COVID-19, but has still presented challenging times for both of us. So I'm grateful to members of the panel as well for acknowledging the work of ourselves and Audit to get to this stage. And pretty much that's a summary, really. It just brings together the reports that you've heard this evening so far and presents the 1920 accounts for approval. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Councillors, questions, comments? Councillor Iqbal?
Chairman, I've no questions or comments. I mean, I was simply going to move the report quite detailed, and I've had a quick flick through it. Nothing seems to stand out that causes me concern, so happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Iqbal. Second for that?
I'll second that, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Council, happy with that? Thank you very much, Craig. Yeah, and I will concur. Again, a lot of detail in that report, a lot of hard work gone into that, clearly, and much appreciated.
Chairman, I think Julie and Sophia feel guilty staying. If you feel free to go if you don't want to stay.
I was conscious I completely forgot the next item was the account. I thought I should probably stay for that one.
Look, we don't want to keep you if you don't.
Absolutely not. No. Okay, moving on. Item number 7. which is the review effectiveness of the system of internal audits.
That's me, Chairman. So we bring this report to you on an annual basis, which is intended for you to do, to see the results of a review of the effectiveness of the system of internal audit. It's fair to say that we've had a bit of a rocky patch with internal audit during 2019-20 with the change in personnel during the year. And I think you're probably aware that led us to retaining MIAA and Ruth here this evening from MIAA. So they were retained later in the year to complete the audit process. And that's then since led to a decision of the council to outsource the internal audit function as a way of building in resilience to the service. So what you have in front of you is an assessment of the effectiveness. I would, as I say, put that caveat that it has been a difficult year for the team. But the work that's been done, that's represented in the report, is an attempt to say to you that it is we have had an effective internal audit system, albeit it has had its moments. So just going through the report, I talk about on page 2 the change in the audit function during the year. I'm satisfied that the work that's been done both by the internal audit team and subsequently by MIAA has been in compliance with public sector internal audit standards, so I'm happy with that. External audit, whilst not doing any specific work on the work of internal audit, haven't raised any particular issues in the audit findings report about the internal control system. So again, that's another area you can place some reliance on. And as part of the work that MIA were retained to do, we asked them to do a review of the system of internal control, taking into account all of the work that had been done during the year, and their opinion is provided at the bottom of page 17. You've had a report on that at a previous committee. The one area where there is a lack of evidence is client satisfaction, where during the year there wasn't, as far as I can see, many, if any, requests for clients who have been audited to indicate how satisfied they are. So that's one area where I can't give you any evidence. But as I said, you need to take all of these issues in the round. And finally, we tend to report on your performance as a committee in terms of your attendance, and that has been very good over the last year, albeit we did cancel the meeting in in March because of COVID. So taken in the round, I think you can be satisfied that there has been an effective system of internal audit. There have been issues. We've addressed those issues earlier this year, and we're going through that outsourcing process now. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Dean. Yes, Ruth.
I've got to remember to turn mute off. I guess it's just linked to the client satisfaction. I'll go back and double check the reports that we provided at the end of last financial year, but our template does have a footer at the bottom which allows the auditee to respond. It's a direct link to a survey. So that will obviously be on all reports going forward. And then at the end of the financial year, we can issue a general survey to auditees and some of the key executives in the organisation and yourselves as well, actually, about how it's working. So we'll do that.
Excellent, Ruth. Thank you. David, yes.
Take my mute button off, that'd help. Via you, perhaps just a question for Dean. I think I noticed in a subsequent paper that there were some audits that weren't completed from last year, 2 or 3 maybe. I don't know. I mean, much as the opinion is substantial, and it's supposed hindsight is a great thing, and you've had a rocky year, but 1 or 2 of those were quite important areas. Well, I think one was, well, there were a couple of, trying to remember what they were, but there was one NDR, was there? And then another one. There were 2 or 3. I mean, given that you're now towards, I'm assuming you've now completed those or reporting them or got them in draft. I just wondered the extent to which that had any impact on, in hindsight, on the outcome from last year, or whether it's just a matter of record that they weren't complete at that point in time. And Ruth seems to be wanting to.
I'm wondering if I might be able to answer this.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you the opportunity, Ruth.
Yeah, there was a handful of audits, and at the time they were issued either as draft or as a discussion draft. They had been QA'd as well, so we take that into account when we form the head of audit opinion. The review of NNDR went out, I think it was actually this morning, as a final report, and the other one was mobile devices, and I think that's just in the process of being finalised now with Craig. So
yeah, I think there was a third one, wasn't there? Where there was that accounting system or something? No, it's all right. It's in the next paper. I know it's there.
So,
Yeah, I think it's fair to say as well, Chairman, that those key financial systems generally get reviewed annually as well. So there isn't necessarily a gap between when they're reviewed. It might just be a bit of a longer period, but they do get reviewed because the key financial systems, and so they will be picked up during this year if they weren't done last year. But there was a fall over. I think we've addressed that to some extent with some of the work we've done. You've seen the audit programme, and I think all those things are now reflected there.
Yeah, just to provide you with that assurance, there's been no significant findings in any of the reviews that we've undertaken.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor, with the report set out, okay to move on. Okay. Agenda item number 8 is the internal audit charter.
I guess that's me. So the internal audit charter, it's a key document. It highlights the activity and the authority that obviously we have to undertake the work on your behalf, but also the expectations of both parties as well. It's a mandated requirement in line with the public sector internal audit standards, and we share this with you on an annual basis. Just to highlight that although this is the first time this will have been presented on behalf of MIAA, there actually hasn't been any changes to the public sector internal audit standards since, I think it's September 2018. So I do need to bring that to your attention. I guess the only other point as well linked to this is that all internal audit providers go through an EQA, an external quality assessment, every 5 years. We've just had that undertaken. Although a formal document hasn't been published yet, we have been informed that we're fully compliant with the standards. And what we will do is we will share that summary report with yourselves at the next meeting once we've got that to publish. It's more for information, so I'll just take any questions on that document.
Thank you, Ruth. David, have you got your hand up? Oh, yeah. David, yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I might as well just leave it up mine. Anyway, you, Chair. Under the current arrangements, Ruth, who's your audit sponsor then? Because they doesn't really make it clear whether it's Dean, Craig, or potentially the interim finance manager. If it does,
yeah. Traditionally, it just highlights both myself as your engagement manager and Louise Cobain as the engagement lead. But you know what? It doesn't actually highlight the you as an organisation. It's Dean. Just to clarify that, I can update the document to reflect that.
I should have guessed it was Dean. Everything else is Dean. I hope it.
I didn't do the accounts.
Okay.
David, thank you. Okay, happy with that. We move on to item number 9, which is the audit plan, the progress report.
Brilliant.
You again, thank you.
Yeah. And before I go into all my description, it's this is the template that we use in line with public sector internal audit standards, actually. So if you do have any feedback on any changes you'd like to make to that template to add any value to, just contact me outside the meeting. That'd be great. So as I say, this is the progress report to the council. It highlights all the work that's in progress at the moment, any key messages coming from any outputs, any assignments, but also the working arrangements that are ongoing as well. These are unprecedented times for everybody, isn't it? And it's definitely a different way of working. I think section 3 on page 2 of this report just illustrates the plan that's been agreed. Now, it looks obviously a bit different to previous years. It's a little bit shorter as well, but this is a risk-based assessment that's been undertaken by both ourselves and through conversations with Dean as well. This plan was approved at the end of August, and in line with national guidance, the plan does focus on those key assurances and those core plan assurances to support your head of audit opinion and ultimately your ADS next year. Like I say, I want to focus on the fact that it does cover all the mandated and follow-up procedures as well in there. As you can see, the work has commenced in quite a few areas, and I do need to highlight actually just some thanks to the local authority for allowing us to order them. I guess, you know, it's like I say, it's unprecedented times, and we have to give a big thanks to all those for accommodating us to kickstart those reviews. As you can see further on in the report, we will obviously be undertaking the follow-ups. We'll be reporting this to you at each meeting. At this point in the year, we've identified all the outputs and the agreed recommendations from, obviously we have our own recommendations that were issued and agreed at the end of last financial year, but also those that were continuing through your previous arrangements. So at the next meeting of the Accounts and Audit Committee, we will be providing an update on the implementation status of each of those recommendations. Just to highlight in Appendix A, it highlights just some of the key performance indicators that we work towards. It's highlighting mainly the progress, and again, we'll be reporting the status of this RAG rating to each meeting. Appendix A further highlights the agreed plan for the remainder of the year, and we've just touched upon it in regular dialogue with Dean about any emerging risks and making sure they're captured correctly. So I guess it's just if there are any queries on that report.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. I'll open it up for questions. Yeah, yes, David.
Only one, I think you touched on it, Ruth.
David?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, David, I think.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Ruth, you mentioned recommendations and the status, because initially I was a bit confused by that table, what it was telling me. Because
yeah, I know.
In fact, it's probably not telling me anything really, just other than the fact that you've got recommendations both historic and current.
Yes.
None of which you can actually establish at the moment whether they're implemented or overdue.
No.
Which I suppose is is just a function of a challenging year and where you are. So I suppose it's just a bit unfortunate that we're in a position where, well, I suppose going back a few months, we knew where we were, and now I suppose we don't. When did you say the next update would be on those?
At the next committee, is it January? Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I suppose it's just a question really for the service going forward, whether if it is an outsourced service, do we rely on internal audit to carry out that function for us? Or is it something that the council should be tracking on a more continuous basis itself? And it's just a question, really. I don't have an answer. It's just a thought, really, in terms of the future. Yeah. And it's just unfortunate that at the moment we've lost that visibility on status and where the council is with high priority recommendations, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess as part of your head of audit opinion, one of the key factors is follow-ups. So there is an element that the internal audit service provider does undertake that work and gather the evidence to support it. I'm the audit manager for a few organisations that tackle the approach to follow-ups differently, because under, say, existing governance arrangements, some organisations do actually take ownership of follow-ups. And coordinated centrally with the evidence then provided to the internal auditor, and that's a discussion I can have with some of the key execs. But ultimately, there is an element that we will be undertaking. Well, the internal audit provider will be undertaking.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
David Rothwell, do you have a question?
I did. Thank you, Ruth. Apologies, as I feel, and I'm sure I should already know the answer to this question, but I'll ask it anyway. In terms of the 2021 year, What's the total quantum of audit days that you're providing to the authority, and how was that figure determined, and how does it benchmark across to similar other authority sizes and compositions?
Yeah, I'm casting my mind back, and I want to say it's 150 days. You've caught me out. But
You're correct, Ruth. It is 150 days.
Yeah, we've actually approached this plan on a risk-based approach through discussions with Dean, and then the financial envelope was decided after that, because obviously these assurances need to be determined first. So yeah, the risk-based discussions were held first rather than it being around a financial envelope. Benchmarking wise, it's a good question. I'm actually attending the Lancashire Head of Audits group for the first time on Friday. I can establish and just get that connection with other organisations about the size of their audit plans, and I can provide that information.
Yeah, if it's probably just worthwhile saying that, of course, the impact of COVID during the first quarter of the year meant that the ability to do internal audit work was significantly affected. So we weren't able to do that amount of work. And in essence, you can't get that time back. You are just left with an amount of time for the remainder of the year to do that. The other thing that I would say is that whilst we had the internal auditor, his time was specifically focused on some work to do with the assurance of grant payments to businesses. So during the first lockdown, we received £25 million, which we had to pay out to businesses to support them through the period of lockdown. But what came with that was a whole assurance framework that we were required to deal with. And so we asked the auditor to do that, ensuring that grant funding got paid to the right people. So in essence, it seemed the best use of the time, and it is in its own way, given the amount of money involved, the risks associated with ensuring those payments were in the right place meant that it was probably appropriate for that auditor to spend his time on that. So it's a combination of those two factors. It's fair to say COVID's had an impact on the delivery of the plan. I think we got it up and running as quickly as possible with MIAA, and we've got a fairly robust plan focused on the key financial systems, again with a mind to, as we get towards the year end, thinking about the annual governance statement and all that, and thinking about external audit and looking at those areas that external audit would look at, ensuring that those were at least covered and taking that risk-based approach as we would do. So those audits that we would tend to add on to bulk out the audit programme were probably the victims early doors in terms of not being done.
Thank you, Dean. David, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, quick question for Dean. When under the previous administration and head of internal audit, wasn't there a separate report we got on the incidence of fraud? There wasn't there something in terms of internal and benefit related fraud? Has that been lost now, or is that coming back?
It's not been lost. It's I suppose it's a victim of the resource that we've had.
Yeah.
So there's two things. One, it's a victim of the resource we've had. Two, the quality of that report to some extent started to be less than I was happy with. The other thing with the benefit fraud, of course, a lot of the benefit fraud activity is passed over to what's called SFIS, which is now with DWP. So to a large extent, we the council are doing that fraud activity, and in essence what we do is identify it and then pass it over to DWP to do the investigation. Our ability to do it was taken off us. So to some extent the work diminished. We still do the National Fraud Initiative, and that's probably the one area that we probably should report to the committee, and it's something that we perhaps need to pick up again.
Okay, thanks, Dave.
Sorry, David, I didn't know if you wanted me to add to that as well. We have, through discussions with Dean as well, we do have an anti-fraud service as part of the assurance function within MIAA. So we did agree if there was anything of significance or any advice or anything like that, we can provide that on a call-off arrangement just in the interim. And then if a more permanent arrangement's needed, then we can provide that.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Tommy, could I ask Dean? Could I ask just a related follow-up? Where are the authority now up to in terms of the process of potentially going to the marketplace for internal audit provision for 21-2?
That's item number 10.
Item number 10.
You set me up nicely.
Thank you, David. Okay, if council are happy with that, yeah, we'll move on to item number 10. This is an update from yourself, Dean.
Yeah, so I'm going to be bearing in mind that Ruth is still with us and that MIA may well be tendering for this contract. So just a chronology of where we've got to. So in March, we sought the authority of the Policy and Resources Committee to go out to market for the internal audit service. That's we went out. We're doing it through what's referred to as the restricted procedure because it's being done through the European tendering process or due process because the value of the contract is such that it requires us to do that. So we're going through the restricted procedure. We've sent out a standard selection questionnaire to as a first stage of vetting potential suppliers to us. And we've had some of those back, and we're now in the process of evaluating those. That process should end hopefully this week, and then we will start the second stage process, which will be an invitation to tender, hopefully in the next week or so, and that should conclude hopefully before Christmas, when we will have tenders back to us, and then we should make a decision on the successful supplier, hopefully in January, if not February. January, because that will then give sufficient leading time for the following financial year. So we're on track with the timetable broadly that I set out to the committee previously. So yeah, that's where we're at.
Okay, thank you, Dean. Anybody got questions for Dean on that one?
Can I just ask in terms of the decision-making processes there, Dean, who's actually involved and how that works?
It is a decision of the Policy and Resources Committee of the Council to award the contract. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Move on to item number 11, which is corporate governance and risk management update.
Yes, Chairman, this has two aspects to it. One is the corporate governance framework. So we use the Sit for Solid framework to self-assess ourselves against, and we have highlighted various areas where we need to do some further work. I would say that overall we are generally compliant in our view. The self-assessment is undertaken by a group of officers that make up the corporate governance working groups. That's myself, the council's monitoring officer, and the head of legal services, and the client and performance manager. That group of officers do the assessment, go through management team, and then bring the results here. You'll see highlighted at paragraph 10 onwards, probably 7 or 8 areas where we believe there's further work required. I don't think there's anything particularly significant in that. It just is us making sure that our governance arrangements are up to date and adequate. Of course, all of this work around corporate governance feeds into the annual governance statement, which is published as part of the statement of accounts. The annual governance statement that we've just put will just be publishing, the statement of accounts just gone, had an action plan in there of areas where we needed to do further work. That further work is set out in the table from paragraph 11 and provide you with individual updates on each of the actions that's been identified, just to show you that progress has been made, and for the benefit of Sophia, who's here, and hopefully she's auditing our accounts next year, you'll see that we're going through a systematic process of looking at this stuff, updating, telling the members about it, and they can ask us questions. So it isn't just a one-off event at the end of the year, it's a process that's conducted throughout the year. Likewise, on page 6, you'll see there that there's the table that gives the top. We normally have the top 10, but the difficulty is we've got quite a number of risks in the same category. So you've got the range of risks there, the highest priority risks that we have across the organisation that get assessed on a quarterly basis to determine where we are and what measures we're taking to try to mitigate some of those risks. So that's it, Chairman. It gives you an update on our corporate governance arrangements, the outstanding issues, the work we're doing, and issues around the risk register that we've got as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Questions for Dean? Comments? Oh, okay, all happy with that? I set out.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Move on to item number 12, the anti-fraud and theft corruption policies. There's A, B, and C. Anybody got any questions, comments, observations on?
Move them all on block, Chair.
Thank you. Number 13, the Treasury Management Report. Craig?
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, just take myself off mute. Yes, members will be familiar with the format of this report. Just builds on the report taken in Q1 for the cumulative period to the half-year period. Yeah, the main things to note there are, given the surplus funding, temporary surplus funding that the council received, we had breached the counterparty limit with the council's incumbent bankers, Lloyds. There was one additional breach in Q2. That has really led us now into discussions with Link Asset Services, the council's treasury advisors, given national, local lockdowns, potentially more funding being passported through the council, and just a review of our counterparty listings to avoid that happening and manage that going forward, really. In summary, no additional borrowing in the period. The one observation there, and again, it's featured elsewhere in discussions this evening, is given the market conditions and the budget we have for investment return, which is about £100,000 in the current year, is unlikely to be achieved. I think Budget Monitoring Position reported to Policy and Resource Committee was in the region of £40,000. So again, in terms of impact of COVID on expenditure and income levels, that's something we continue to lobby for. But going forward, the budget associated with surplus cash deposits and investment income will no doubt take a hit as a consequence. Whether we recompense through government, again, we continue to lobby. And pretty much a summary of where we're at, really. Thanks.
Thank you, Craig. Questions for Craig? Craig, just a question for myself. It's just on Appendix A, it's the PWLB, the long-term debt. Some of the debt which is quite old is obviously a much higher rate than some of the newer debt. Is there any opportunity to refinance any of that debt onto a lower rate?
There may well be. Again, indeed, this week we have a meeting with Link, who I referred to earlier, and part of that discussion, in addition to the benchmarking of the counterparty list, is to seek the premiums or discounts that are on offer with regard to legacy debt. So if there is an opportunity to refinance that's in the interest of the council, as you say, in terms of the rate on some of that legacy debt, then that's an avenue we'll continue to explore.
Thanks, Greg.
Chairman, I just won't get your hopes up on that longer term debt. When the PW are getting 4.75% offers, the likelihood of us replacing that, I think, is pretty remote.
Well, I was thinking that then, but I was just.
But we'll ask. We always ask the question.
Well, there's a potentially a big chunk of money to save, isn't there? Okay. Councillors, any other questions, comments on the report, Treasury Management? Yes, Brian. Yeah, Brian, you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Councillor. Yeah.
I would just like to say that during these very strange circumstances, I personally think that Pendle Council are doing a great job, and they should have a round of applause if we could. Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah, okay with that.
Brian, you can give us a round of applause Thursday night at 8 o'clock. Stand outside your door.
Okay.
Okay, that's the last item on the agenda. I would like to thank MIA and Graham Thornton for their contributions tonight. That's really valuable. Thank you very much for your time. Greatly appreciated. Thanks to David and David as well, and to officers and councillors. And that is it. And have a good evening.
Okay, thank you.
Nice meeting you as well.